Hello, and welcome to another of PAVE's weekly virtual panel discussions. My name is Ed Niedermeyer. I am the Communications Director here at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. And we are here today to talk about an aspect of automated vehicles that is really important because sort of our history, every time new forms of mobility have come about, their sort of success or not has really always sort of come down a lot on the question of infrastructure. You can't almost can't have mobility without some form of infrastructure supporting it. And there are a lot of just fascinating discussions going on at the intersection of AVs and infrastructure, actually even right now. And so, I'm really thrilled to be able to dig into some of those a little bit today. And we have three amazing guests here. From Mercer, we have Robert Dingess. Robert, welcome.
Hello. Welcome. Thanks.
From INRIX, Avery Ash. Avery, welcome.
Hey.
And from Michigan DOT, Michele Mueller. Michele,
hello.
welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to start and kind of at the high level. And Robert, let's start with you. And I want to get each of your sort of view on this. But is there sort of like a hierarchy of needs, if you will? Right. Obviously, there are lots of things that we can do, but is there a way to sort of differentiate between sort of what are the priorities, sort of shorter term or most important when it comes to infrastructure and AVs?
Well, I do serve on a number of groups that have been trying to figure that or answer that question. And we really got this issue of on the physical infrastructure, trying to understand that when Federal Highways back in 2018 put out a request for information from the AV community and just said, tell us what you need from us. How do we need to adapt the federal aid highway program to begin to address this issue from a physical infrastructure standpoint? I guess what I would say is, because we don't have a lot of what I would call research or studies into physically what is needed to support AV technologies, we've been trying to take the feedback that we've received in certain areas and then begin to apply it to what do humans need and try to bring those two issues together. So I'll give you a few examples. When you look at how we move people and things in the United States and where we move people and things, it's fairly apparent that from a vehicle miles traveled standpoint, the interstates are a really interesting target, or the limited access freeways. One, they don't have pedestrians and cyclists and traffic signals that create great complexities with how these systems will interface with those other road users. And so you can begin to look at a limited set of factors. We began to look at issues like what kind of uniformity could we apply to those interstates that would have a maximum impact. Our interstates make up about 2% of our lane miles in the country. So from the investment that it would take to get us there, you're talking about a small amount of roads. 25% of our overall vehicle miles traveled occur on the interstates, 40% of truck traffic. So we really focused there, and some of them are really simple. And it's just going to a wider marking from a 4-inch to a 6-inch wide marking. It allows the cameras to have a longer, they can perceive those markings farther out. And we had good data on humans for that. Added edge line extensions on an exit ramp so it doesn't just disappear, because a lot of these technologies try to center between the two lines, and when they disappear they again try to center and then they're coming back. And so those were some simple items that we could look at. And so if you were to say what are the two key things that we could start with, it would be things that aren't very sexy, they don't get a lot of airplay, but it's just basic blocking and tackling from an infrastructure standpoint that can begin to maximize the value of a small segment of our roadway that we use a lot in the United States to move people and things.
Yeah, and Michele, I mean, you run a DOT, making sure that that lane markings are up to date and uniform is your job, right? Can you talk to us, explain to a little bit, maybe, you know, how much work does that take? You know, how much of your job is just making sure that things are consistent and uniform?
Yeah, so we have a group within our department. I made a connected automated vehicle program in Southeast Michigan, but we do have a defined group within MDOT that's handled pavement markings and has for years. They've been in existence. We've had a lot of conversation. They're part of our conversations around both connected and automated vehicles, right? Because there will be a transition, and I think as we talk about these things, we can't just fully assume fully autonomous vehicles, right? We have to understand that there's a transitional phase that's going to happen for years. Not everybody's going to go out and get an autonomous vehicle tomorrow. So the infrastructure has to be able to accommodate all types in all segments of what that will look like during that transition. I think it is important. We deal with, I do tons of work with all large auto manufacturer suppliers, everybody end to end here in Michigan, which has been great. And a lot of things, just kind of talking about pavement markings, I can talk about a whole bunch of different aspects that we consider, but in regards to pavement markings, the departments of transportation, we're not the only ones. We can't afford to redo every single marking on every single roadway every single year. The cost associated to that seems like you're just putting paint on a road. How expensive can it be? Well, it can be really expensive, right? There's certain qualities those markings have to meet for different weather conditions, right? Different, the vehicles have challenges associated with even roadways that run in Michigan, east and west, right? And in other places too, because of the sunrise and the sunset. They put different shadowing, different glows, those types of things on those markings, let alone when you have snow and fog and things like that. So a couple different elements, things that we have to think about, you know, as we're moving forward and we're trying to understand, okay, how do you overcome that? And a lot of these vehicles, they're working to overcome even a challenge such as crack sealing, right? A lot of us do crack sealing on our roads to extend the life of those. And that involves the black tar, right? That goes in the cracks. Some of the vehicles are picking up those and assuming those are lane markings. So how do you overcome that so that the vehicle understands what is a lane marking and what isn't a lane marking? So they are challenges, and we've had this conversation with many companies that say, well, we need new pavement markings. Well, the technology's got to be able to adapt to the fact that they won't always be new. You know, different things happen when they stripe. The stripes aren't always in the same spot. As much as we think they should be, you know, when the trucks run and they do get offset a little bit, including the, you know, dashed markings and things like that. So, you know, from our perspective, and if we want to get into other things too, you know, happy to outside of pavement markings, you know, of other both physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure things that we look at as the DOT.
Yeah. Avery, I want to get your perspective on this as well. I know you look at, you know, huge amounts of data, so maybe you see this more as the digital sort of infrastructure she mentioned, or do you have some thoughts on the
Yeah, I mean, there are some pieces that are just going to have to remain physical, right? You're going to have lane striping. You know, you're going to have pavement quality. You're going to have to, at least for the foreseeable future, for human drivers, have physical signage. But I do think there is a kind of augmentation to that physical infrastructure, where a digitization of, for example, you know, a public record of what should the lanes, what lane striping should you expect on this roadway? What is the lane width? Is there a protected bike lane present, or a painted, or a painted bike lane present? So to help set some of those expectations, that's not physical infrastructure, still needs to be supported by physical infrastructure, but having that digital companion to a physical piece of infrastructure can really help to no pun intended, fill the cracks where there are challenges in the physical world that a vehicle or human driver is going to encounter.
Yeah, and so one of the really fascinating opportunities here, it seems to me, is that, and we heard about this actually just last week, Kodiak was talking about doing this in Texas, but actually using AVs as a way to kind of create some of that digital infrastructure, Avery, that you were talking about, right? Where the AVs, they've got these sensors, they're driving over all, you know, the roads anyway. Why not use them to sort of monitor and understand, what's going on with the infrastructure. Avery, is that something that's common? Are we still sort of in the early stages of that?
I think we're still in the early stages of that, and kind of understanding what can be filled by third party, by private entities. And really that's kind of on the HD mapping side of the house. If you start to consider those HD maps, at least the representation of the physical world components as virtual infrastructure, it's the representation of what a vehicle is going to expect to find. I think the interesting point, and where this comes back into spending on public infrastructure, is what is the ability for and the role of a road authority in participating in that HD mapping process. So, data about the quality of pavement that's being collected by a private vehicle operator. What is the interface between that data and the public sector? So there's obviously value in that being shared with a state DOT, where to understand where investments could best be prioritized to fix the most severe degradations in quality. But there's also going to be the private component of that, where that data is communicated out potentially in a straighter or a shorter path to vehicles to let them know. It's helpful for a DOT to know there's a serious pothole ahead. It's more important for a human driver or for an autonomous vehicle to know that that's coming in terms of timeliness, right?
And luckily we have a state DOT director here. So Michele, is that how much value? I don't know if you can quantify it, or how much value would it give you to have sort of autonomous vehicles out and giving you sort of a real-time sense of where maybe to make those investments in infrastructure? You have the inconsistencies.
Yeah, so I guess I would say, first thing to start with, it's not just autonomous vehicles to us, right? It's any vehicle that's out there that can have and be instrumented with equipment to capture that data, right? So I think that's an important note, because these are things we could actually be doing and getting today. Most DOTs, most local agencies pay for some sort of capture of that work to be done, right? Somebody goes out and captures road condition with different equipment and things, and we pay for those services to have that information, because that's how we're rated as well with federal highway, right? And how we get funding to redo roads and what our infrastructure grade, actually is from an inventory basis. So when you start looking at, I'm just going to say stick with autonomous, but when you start looking at the vehicle capture to those, there's a lot of work being done in that space, as Avery was saying, that from a mapping perspective. There's also a lot of companies, from auto companies to suppliers, that are working and have their own fleets instrumented capturing that, and for multiple reasons. One is to see what kind of data can they actually capture, and then what value is the data, right? Value from use, but then also value from potential a business case, right? And model maybe. So we do work with those. We do a lot of review of some of that data they're capturing to understand, because not all of it's useful to an owner operator, right? Some of it's useful to other people or other entities that are using it for varieties of reasons. We're interested in the main things from an operational perspective of our infrastructure. So, when you look at the data sets associated to that, and to answer your question, it's a huge value to us. The big question becomes is, how do we get in? What does it cost? We are all unfortunately hurting for money, in different areas, and it's just the way it is right now. So, how much can we afford to pay for that, and what's the cost? Is there a business model associated where maybe a DOT provides information return, right? Such as work zone live, work zone information that a lot of these entities can't get themselves, right? They don't have it. It's not available out in a public forum. Those come from the operating agencies. So is there something that is a model there where data goes both ways, an agreement? And as a DOT, we can't sell it anyways, right? So when I get data, I'm not going to sell it. I'm not allowed to, because I'm a governmental entity. So there's a ton of interest there. Like I said, we do a lot of work around that in reviewing it and understanding what is the data that actually DOTs can use. And folks are working, on what those models could be. I think every conversation around connected and automated vehicles is somehow always comes back to data. Who's doing what with the data, and how are we going to get it and use it?
Yeah, and so Robert, I mean, even if a state could have perfectly funded DOT, which nobody has, right, and had perfect consistency on all of their roads, you would still have the challenge of crossing state lines. Is there consistency from place to place? One of the things that makes this conversation so interesting is that right now there's something called the MUTCD, which I'm going to ask you to explain what that is. I know it's in comment period right now. What does it mean, and what is sort of the relevance of that to automated vehicles in particular?
So the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices is the national standard on all of the, if you will, how traffic control devices are installed, which ones are can be installed. It's why all of our stop signs are red and our yield signs are yellow, and why they look the way they do. And so Federal Highways just proposed an update to that, and they included the creation of a Part 5 they titled Automated Vehicles, which is really interesting. It was a reading of Part 5 indicates that they created this section with the idea of providing agencies with information as best they can understand on what they would do to improve a road corridor. And here are some things you might want to do if you want to get this corridor ready for automated vehicles. Now, they made some other changes within the document that are new national standards. I mentioned a couple: the 6-inch wide line, the dotted edge line extension. And the reason for that is it begins to provide that standard state to state. Some agencies are even different district to district within a state based on how they apply certain standards. Well, this national standard with the MUTCD begins to break some of that down, if you will. And it's important. In some ways, the Europeans went through this with their rail system when they formed the European Union. They had rail that was of different gauges, and you used to have to stop at the border and change everything over. They're now having their conversations on automation as it relates to this, and we've had similar issues from a digital standpoint. Tolling went through this. Easy Pass. We don't even think much about it today, but it used to be that you'd have to figure out what technology can I use depending on what state that I'm in. So we've learned a lot of lessons over the last, say, 15 to 20 years that I think is going to help us as we move forward. But the MUTCD, because it is a national document, because it is, if you will, the law when it comes to certain aspects of traffic engineering, really provides an opportunity and to kind of break down this lack of uniformity that we see across the country. The question is, as you said, how do we do it in a way that doesn't make it so that Michele has no money for other things? When budgets are tight, how do we prioritize? Where do we prioritize? And so that's kind of the conversation that's happening now with the rulemaking. Is they took everything they knew and they kind of put it out there, and now it's a tremendous opportunity for the broad community to respond on what they like, what they don't like, what they think we're ready for, what we're not ready for. But a lot of interesting proposals in there that I think lays a foundation for where we go in the future.
Absolutely. And again, Michele, I've got to ask you, I know state governments always love the federal government telling them how to do their job. What is sort of on a practical basis, or what kind of effect does this MUTCD have on the work that you do?
So we use it every day, right? I mean, it guides our principals just like it does anyone else. We were already in the transition of pavement markings anyways, so it always makes adjustments. We do have considerable amount of our staff that sits on the different subgroups that are stated to doing that. So they're firsthand in providing value back from our experience with connected automated vehicles too, and where some of those, will fit in. The challenge always has been, and actually I just went through this for a pilot project we're actually doing right now, is sometimes we have to, the new technology requires maybe something a little different than what's in that MUTCD, which we're, obliged to follow, right? So, but I do want to be very clear that there are processes that are identified and in place that we use today and will continue to use to help innovate and be innovative, integrate, and get a better understanding in the Federal Highway Administration group, they participate in those, right? So when we need to vary something, we just ask, we have a process that we ask for a variance to that MUTCD. And we have to provide documentation and things, right? There is a safety aspect and a review that is pretty lengthy that goes through that. So, so we can still be innovative, we can still do these things, but we do follow the MUTCD and we will continue to do so. And we are an integral part of those, that feedback that, you know, Robert was talking about. This is our opportunity as a state DOT to weigh into those and use our experiences with all the work we've been doing in this space to understand how, you know, what are changes that could be, and how do we open those doors enough to allow innovation, but yet keep that consistency across the states, right? Because we don't know what's yet to come, right? The unknown, what you don't, your worst enemy is what you don't know. So no matter what changes get made to it today, I think it's very important for everybody to understand there is a process to keep that innovation going, right? So this new revised version doesn't mean this is all we can do. In states, if you don't leverage, and I encourage them to do so, because Federal Highway, they're eager to learn, right? They want to see the new technology, and they want to understand it, but they want it to be safe and they want to keep uniformity to the best they can. And they do leverage these pilot projects for others. So things we do here that we get a variance for, they leverage for other states. And they're very, very proactive in doing that and supporting us.
Yeah, and Avery, whether the MUTCD or funding bills or whatever, in all the different kinds of policy, AVs are sort of a newer, you know, make an appearance sort of for the first time in some cases in these different policies, and you know the politics, right? And so there's already, you know, conflict or competition, let's say, for resources and priorities. And sometimes, you know, AVs come in and people say, well, they're not even here yet, you know, and this takes away from, you know, what we're advocating for. You know, a lot of cases that'll be, you know, pedestrian infrastructure, cyclist infrastructure. You know, is this all a sort of zero-sum game? You know, does sort of support for an investment in sort of AV benefiting infrastructure, doesn't necessarily trade off with other stakeholders?
Yeah, I think if you're kind of thinking about it thoughtfully, it doesn't have to. I mean, a lot of the improvements and requirements that we've talked about here that would help more effective operation of automated driving systems. It's the same kind of things that constituents are complaining about, in potholes and pavement quality, missing lane striping, or missing signage, or confusing signage. I mean, the MUTCD has been around for 80 years. It's an evolving document, right? This is an appropriate process to get feedback from new communities, new road users about what they are struggling with the current state of uniformity. It's never going to be comprehensive, perfect, or done. You know, I think you can all identify with the challenge of driving in a new state or jurisdiction, and you know, you're pretty sure on what the rules of the road are, but there's always going to be questions. You know, you pull up to the light and you kind of have to look around, and if there's no signage about no turn on right, like, am I in an area where I can do that? Can I not? And you know, those same struggles for a human driver, same sorts of challenges that an automated driving system is facing, right? Of challenges in uniformity that make driving in a new area, you know, a problem. You got to learn new rules in the same way that a human's going to have to. An automated vehicle is as well. And you know, I think there's both the kind of the foundational base layer of the MUTCD, and on top of that, there's opportunity for innovation and augmentation to help bring additional certainty to road users.
Yeah, and Michele, is there sort of like you know, some practical examples maybe you can give of other things that, you know, where you're able to sort of benefit you know, multiple stakeholders, you know, doing things that the AV developers say will help them, but will also, yeah, benefit other stakeholders? How do you balance that in a practical way?
Yeah, so I think, you know, quick, easy examples, right, are, you know, you look at pedestrians, you look at non-motorized transportation modes, you look at things such as people that have disabilities, you know, so the things that we're looking at and that are coming kind of these needs or infrastructure asks from the autonomous teams that are working on these systems are actually things that are benefiting outside of even having autonomous vehicles, right, that are benefiting these users. You know, if we can, you know, the amount that we can do with giving the information from the infrastructure with red light violation type things. You know, we've got an intersection that we piloted that's been running for a few years now, and we're advancing on that. What it does is it looks at near miss type situations that are happening. You know, as an owner operator, we don't know what those are. I don't have staff to put out there to know, you know, every day what's going on. But a lot of those involve pedestrians, right? So you look at those systems and they can provide value to these vehicles, but they can provide a huge value to the other users of the system, no matter which mode they're using. You know, and then people that do have disabilities that are trying to use our infrastructure and our systems, how do they cross the road? You know, they need to go from their house to a doctor's appointment, and maybe they're on opposite sides of the street. What's the opportunity they have, you know, for better quality of life of being able to do that, you know, without somebody assisting them, or a certain time of day because they have to work around someone else's schedule. Kids crossing a road for a school crossing, you know, look at how many things happen there. And you know, even with railroads and rail crossings, and you know, the list goes on, right, of things where you can actually provide a huge benefit to other users of our systems outside of these vehicles, right? They're all looking and they're all benefiting from these improvements. I think just the conversations are happening more frequently, and they're being forced to come to the table because the technology now is here, that's forcing a lot of the industries that maybe never have come together before, and bringing them together and having conversations with communities and things that really maybe never happened as much as they should have to bring out those user needs.
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a fascinating conversation. Our 30 minutes is almost over. It's just blown by. And we didn't even get the chance to discuss sort of some of the V2X connected vehicle stuff. We'll have to have you all back to discuss that. But Robert, can you just, any sort of final thoughts on this, on the physical infrastructure to support AVs before we go?
I would encourage those that are interested to, you can find the proposed updates in the Federal Register. And there's a part of this new Part 5 automated vehicles that I find fascinating, and it's the part that's called 5C, and all it says is future considerations. And I've begun to, after I completed the evaluation of so much of the rest of the document, began to let my mind wander as to what could populate a Part 5C, future considerations. Is it the kind of digital infrastructure where we're talking about work zones or traffic signals? Is it a reference to digital standards that agencies might need to be aware of? You know, what could populate that as part of this new 5C? And I've been having conversations with tier ones and others about, what do you think? What should we recommend? What should we be considering as it relates to this new 5C?
And Avery, you know, what are there, you know, your final thoughts, but, you know, are there sort of tools that folks can be using to sort of understand, you know, and start to look into what these challenges are?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't have to look a whole lot further than, you know, the comments that we hear from industry, or the items that we talked about here today, or the complaints of human drivers, frankly, because they're going to align pretty closely with the challenges that automated vehicles are facing. You know, I think, you know, to expand on what Robert had said, you know, one of the challenge points I think going forward will be, there's a tendency when you pair infrastructure with a future focused technology like automated driving systems, to assume that the infrastructure must be future focused as well. And I think there's a little bit of fallacy with that there's a lot of kind of here and now benefits to current road users that, you know, it may not be big and sexy and frankly, thankfully expensive, but it's going to, you know, it's the basic blocking and tackling that's required to improve safety across the board, and AVs will reap a lot of those benefits as well.
And Michele, we'll leave the last word to you. How do you think about this challenge going into the future?
So I think we need to embrace it. I think we need to leverage it, and we need to understand all the different lives that we can impact, right? And we can impact those in a positive way. It doesn't matter whether you're a large auto company, whether you're a freight, you know, delivery, whether you're a pedestrian. We can change qualities of life with the technology that we're talking about. If you're not already involved in it, figure out how you can become part of it. Figure out what your role is in it and where you can provide value. Maybe it's into discussions, maybe it's in technology that you have. And how do we do that today? And feeding a little bit real quick on Avery's comment, we can do it today, right? There's lots of things we can do today to give benefits. We've seen vehicles come off the assembly line and they're already preventing crashes, right? Blind spot warnings and things like that. They're doing their job today. Even though some people think they're annoying, they're doing their job. And if, you know, we've heard many incidents where they are saving crashes and ultimately injuries, you know, to our own family members. So don't lose sight of the future vision. Realize these are your family that we're talking about, providing safety and mobility to. It could be your sister, your mom, or your dad. It's not necessarily the person 12 hours away. So embrace that and know that you can make a difference to your own family safety.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, this 30 minutes has just flown by. There's so much to discuss, and again, we need to at some point come back and talk about the connected piece of this, because that is quite important. But for now, thank you so much to the guests for taking the time to help explain some of these topics to us today. Michele Mueller from MDOT, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Avery Ash from INRIX, thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
And Robert Dingess from Mercer. Thank you, Robert, so much.
Thanks, Ed.
And thank you to our audience for once again taking the time to learn more about automated vehicles and the future of transportation. We will be back here again next week with another of PAVE's weekly virtual discussions, and we look forward to seeing you then.